Welcome to VSOW, the deep dive designed to cut through the noise and get straight to the critical knowledge you need.
Today, we are undertaking something really fascinating. It's a piece of textual archaeology.
Really?
We're opening a document that just speaks volumes about the early American mind.
And that's Thomas Jefferson's very unique, intensely personal version of the New Testament Gospels.
Exactly. It's officially titled The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, but, everyone calls it the Jefferson Bible.
Right. And our mission here, our goal for you listening, isn't just to know that this book exists. We want to dig into the profound why. Not just what's in these, 84 pages, but why one of America's key founding fathers, a champion of the Enlightenment of political liberty, why did he feel he had to physically make his own scripture?
Yeah, using a penknife and glue.
Exactly. And this absolute conviction that he, the rational man, could somehow find the pure moral truth hidden under centuries of, dogma.
In this project, it really reveals a core tension, doesn't it? How do you anchor a new democracy, one founded on these really radical ideas of political freedom? How do you anchor that to a moral framework? It shows Jefferson, this sort of apostle of rational liberty, trying to synthesize his whole worldview into, it really is a kind of democratized theology.
Yeah.
Stripped clean of mystery, focused just on ethics.
And that opening image is it's astounding, isn't it? You have to picture this. Thomas Jefferson, the guy who drafted the Declaration of Independence,
Right.
sitting quietly at Monticello. He's not drafting laws or treaties. He's got a razor, maybe a penknife, and glue, and he's literally cutting and pasting verses.
4 different languages.
Greek, Latin, French, English,
Yeah.
Creating this short new book, threaded with silk and linen, bound in red goatskin. And it was just for him, for his nightly reading.
Pretty much his personal private reading material. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. This wasn't just like a summary or his favorite bits. No, it was an exercise in intellectual authority, this whole 4-language mosaic arrangement. It was meant to produce a single, coherent narrative of Jesus' life and teaching.
Okay.
With Jefferson himself acting as the organizing nous, the mind, the intellect behind the whole structure. He's the editor-in-chief, deciding what makes the cut.
So we really need to explore what this radical intellectual move actually involved, and maybe why it kicked up such a fuss, such a controversy a century later.
Absolutely. It's quite a story.
Okay, so let's unpack the sheer labor here. This wasn't a casual afternoon project. This was deliberate, meticulous work.
Over decades, really, but the final push came late in his life. He finished this definitive version, The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, in 1820.
And it was, you called it idiosyncratic. It really reflects that Enlightenment mindset, doesn't it?
Totally. The Enlightenment valued physical, empirical evidence, right? And Jefferson applied that very literally to the text itself. His method was physical cut and paste.
Taking extracts from printed Bibles in 4 languages.
Greek, Latin, French, and English, yes. And carefully gluing them onto new paper leaves to make this continuous story. It's quite something.
And this 1820 version, we should stress, it wasn't his first go at this.
No, that's right. He tried earlier, back in 1804. He called that one The Philosophy of Jesus of Nazareth.
And that one didn't survive.
No, it's lost. And apparently it didn't quite satisfy him anyway. Interestingly, that first version was reportedly intended for the use of the Indians.
Really? That's fascinating. Suggesting he thought this rational ethic could be like a universal civilizing tool, even in a missionary context.
It certainly opens up a window into his worldview, doesn't it? But the failure of that first attempt, maybe it led to the real rigor of the second one.
Okay, so the final assembly, what does that tell us? 85 numbered leaves, you said?
Yes, 85. But it's the arrangement that's key. He put the Greek and Latin texts on the left-hand pages.
The older languages.
Right. And then the corresponding French and English texts on the right-hand pages, side by side.
Why go to all that trouble with 4 languages? Why not just use, say, the King James Version? It was right there.
Well, I think he needed the original languages, the Greek especially, and the Latin Vulgate, for his own textual assurance, like proof. The Greek was the original language of the New Testament docs, Latin the historical anchor. Putting all 4 side by side was his way of saying, look, I'm not just relying on one translation that might be flawed or biased.
Okay. So he's trying to get to the most authentic, rational core by cross-referencing. He's basically acting as his own fact checker.
His own ecclesiastical council, almost.
Yeah, so he's grounding his version in the original languages, even as he's literally physically cutting the text apart. That's quite the paradox.
It is.
We know he arranged the extracts chronologically, so he's after some kind of biographical truth, right? Did he just make up the order?
No, he definitely leaned on existing scholarship for the structure. He followed a specific framework from a work by William Newcomb, A Harmony in Greek of the Gospels.
Okay, so Newcomb's Harmony.
Yeah, it was an academic work, trying to sort out the timeline of the four Gospels. This is important. Jefferson wasn't just picking inspirational quotes randomly. He wanted a historical, coherent flow.
Right.
But he trusted Newcomb's academic work to provide that basic structure.
But hang on, if he's relying on Newcomb's Harmony, doesn't that kind of undermine the idea of him being the sole organizing nous? He's choosing which interpretation to follow.
That's a really sharp point.
Yeah.
It shows his genius wasn't necessarily in inventing the timeline, but in using that timeline as a filter. Newcomb gave him the skeleton, you'd say.
Yeah.
But Jefferson decided which specific verses got to be on that skeleton. Most harmonies back then used parallel columns to actually highlight the differences between the Gospels.
Right, to show the contradictions.
Exactly. Jefferson rejected that completely. He didn't want discrepancies. He wanted one smooth, continuous story of the teacher. And he asserted his intellectual authority by just cutting out everything that didn't fit that flow.
And the physical book itself.
Tiny. About 8 inches tall, less than 5 wide,
Right.
stitched together by a Richmond bookbinder, Frederick Mayo. Bound in red leather, gilt trim, very elegant, but kept entirely private, just for his own use.
And he read it every night?
Reportedly, yes. Read something moral, were on to ruminate in the intervals of sleep every single night.
Okay, so this painstaking physical act, it clearly stems directly from his deep philosophical beliefs. Jefferson was, arguably the American champion of the Enlightenment.
Absolutely. That whole movement demanded rational examination of everything, morals, politics, science.
And that worldview inherently put him on a collision course with traditional religious authority, didn't it?
Oh, completely. His political fights, his reading habits, everything reinforced that.
Yeah.
He deeply distrusted traditional authority, whether it was a king or a bishop. He saw scripture as, well, an ancient text, an antiquarian text, he called it, subject to the same critical analysis as any other historical document.
Which explains that famous advice he gave his nephew. Read the Bible, then, as you would read Livy or Tacitus. Treat it like any other history book.
Exactly. No special pleading.
And that critical stance, treating the Bible like Livy, that's exactly why his enemies in that nasty 1800 election could paint him as an atheist, right? Like the French revolutionaries.
Yeah, they definitely weaponized it. He wasn't an atheist, but he was certainly a rationalist. Most people saw him as a deist.
Okay, so deism. For Jefferson, that meant believing in a creator who set things up, established natural laws, but then stepped back.
Pretty much. A watchmaker god, as the analogy goes.
Yeah.
Creates the watch, winds it up, lets it run according to its internal mechanism. No divine intervention, no miracles, no revealed scripture in the traditional sense.
So this whole Bible project was his attempt to, save Christian morality from traditional Christianity?
In a way, yes. To save its moral core by extracting the Christ of history from religion. He wanted the pure ethical teaching of Jesus to survive what he saw as the irrational baggage.
And he thought that pure teaching had been buried, corrupted over time. Where did he get that idea?
He was heavily influenced by some radical English theologians, especially Joseph Priestley.
Priestley, the scientist and Unitarian minister.
The very same. Priestley argued that the simple, pure morality of Jesus got corrupted later on by theological ambition, by power plays. Jefferson really latched onto that.
Okay.
He argued that figures like St. Paul and the early church leaders, they built this complex, dogmatic, ecclesiastical structure right on top of what was originally a simple moral foundation. They buried the rational teacher under layers of, what he considered superstition.
Which brings us right to the heart of his theological beef, these Platonic mysteries he wanted to get rid of. That sounds kind of abstract.
Yeah.
What did he actually mean by attacking Platonic mysteries and guys like Athanasius or Calvin?
Yeah, it's a very pointed critique. Jefferson believed that when the early church developed these really complex ideas like the Trinity or the full divinity of Christ, they weren't getting that from Jesus' simple ethical teachings.
Where did they get it from then, in his view?
From pagan Greek philosophy. specifically Neoplatonist ideas that were floating around in the Hellenistic world back then.
Ah.
So to Jefferson, all these concepts, the Immaculate Conception, the Trinity, the idea of the Eucharist being literally Christ's body, they were all just metaphysical inanities, complex intellectual games that only served to elevate the priests and confuse ordinary people.
So he saw those doctrines, Athanasius and the Trinity, Loyola, Calvin, as basically paganism sneaking back in.
He literally called them mere relapses into polytheism.
Yeah.
He argued that giving Jesus divine attributes was just reintroducing multiple gods under a Christian label.
Wow. Okay, so his mission wasn't just religious, it was profoundly political, anti-authoritarian. Strip away the mysteries, strip away the justification for the church's centralized power.
Precisely. His whole blueprint was anti-dogma, a rejection of superstition, ignorance, and error that he thought were entrenched by church authorities. And that path led him straight towards American Unitarianism.
Right, the movement that rejected the Trinity saw Jesus more as a moral example than God himself.
Exactly.
He never formally joined a Unitarian church, did he? But he clearly felt an affinity. He said he was of a sect by myself, but then told a friend he had to be contented with being a Unitarian by myself.
Yeah, he walked a fine line publicly, but privately his sympathies were clear. And he genuinely seemed to believe Unitarianism was the future for America.
He actually predicted that.
Oh yeah, famously predicted that the current generation would see Unitarianism, this rational faith, become the general religion of the United States. He saw it as the perfect fit for a republic that valued reason and individual conscience.
The ultimate rational faith for a free society.
You got it. So his secret Bible, it was probably intended as a kind of prototype, a model for a Unitarian scripture, for educated young men maybe, to replace what he saw as the defective council-created New Testament from a backward and barbaric epoch.
The moral textbook for the new republic's leaders?
Could be. That seems to fit his overall project.
Okay, so if the retained parts show his hope, the cuts definitely define his skepticism. We move from the why to the surgical what. And the most obvious thing is the systematic removal of anything supernatural.
It's clinical, isn't it? The intention was clearly to remove every single aspect of the Gospels that suggested divinity, miracles, or metaphysical complexity.
But first off, he limits it just to the 4 Gospels.
Right. The entire book of Acts, all the epistles like Paul's letters and Revelation,
So on.
just vanishes.
So he's zeroing in only on Jesus's life and teachings. Everything else is seen as those later corruptions.
Exactly. That's the filter he applies. And then within the Gospels themselves, well, he becomes a bit of a textual assassin.
Ruthlessly cutting out anything that paints Jesus as more than just a supremely moral, but totally human teacher.
Absolutely. All references to miracles, divinity, and crucially the resurrection, all gone. He wanted a Jesus who was very much a man, someone whose authority came purely from his message, not from magic tricks.
Okay, let's look at the narrative itself. If the miraculous birth is gone, where does Jefferson's story of Jesus even begin?
It's quite jarring, actually. Luke 1 and Matthew 1, poof. No angels, no star, no shepherds, no wise men, no lengthy genealogies trying to prove Davidic lineage.
So how does it start?
It starts very abruptly with a historical governmental event, the decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Luke chapter 2, verse 1.
Wow, a secular administrative opening.
Exactly. It signals right away. This is a story grounded in human history, in politics, not in divine intervention.
Even small hints of divinity get the chop, like Jesus at 12 in the temple saying he was about his father's business.
Gone. Jefferson ensures Jesus grows up logically, gains wisdom through experience, doesn't just possess it innately.
And the miracles, that must have been a lot of cutting.
Oh, huge amounts.
Yeah.
Jesus never casts out any devils or heals the lame. Think about the famous story of healing the blind man in John 9.
With the clay and spittle.
Right. Jefferson keeps the ethical discussion around it, the debate about whether the man's blindness was caused by sin, but the actual miracle, the part with the clay and spittle, completely omitted.
So the moral teaching stays, the magical act disappears.
Precisely.
And the really big ones, temptation in the desert, feeding the masses, water into wine.
All gone. Because if Jesus can multiply fish or walk on water, his authority comes from supernatural power, not from reason. Jefferson needed his Jesus to persuade through superior ethics alone.
So logically, all those core Christian doctrines, Immaculate Conception, Trinity, the Eucharist being Christ's body, original sin, all those Platonic mystifications he hated.
Excised. Completely removed. If it smacked of metaphysics or dogma, it was out.
Which leads to a very final ending, doesn't it? If Jesus isn't divine.
The ending is definitive. Stark, really. The narrative concludes with Jesus' brutal, very human, but entirely natural death and burial.
What are the last words?
The last included verses describe his body being laid in the tomb. There laid they Jesus, and rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed.
Full stop.
Wow, and departed, yeah. No mention of the stone being rolled away later. No appearance to Mary Magdalene. Absolutely zero prospect of resurrection. For Jefferson, the miracle was the teaching itself, not escaping the grave.
Now, this whole approach, stripping away the supernatural to find the historical Jesus, how does that fit with what actual biblical scholars were doing around that time?
It lines up remarkably well with what's called the first wave of critical biblical scholarship. This really took off in German universities, starting late 18th century, early 19th.
Okay.
Scholars were trying to apply Enlightenment rationalism directly to the Gospels. The assumption was, if you could just peel away the layers of miracle stories in later theology, you'd find the authentic historical core of Jesus' life and message.
So Jefferson, finishing his work in 1820, he's right in the mix of that intellectual movement.
He is, absolutely. Even if today his specific work is seen more as maybe an apologetic work, reflecting early American deism rather than pure academic scholarship like the Germans were doing.
But the basic assumption is the same.
Fundamentally, yes. The assumption is that the original biblical authors were influenced by their own prejudices, superstitions, and ignorance, and that these needed to be edited out by a later rational mind like Jefferson's.
Okay, so the cuts define his skepticism. But the passages he kept, they must define his hope, right? What kind of positive message actually emerges from this radically streamlined text? What does Jefferson's Jesus teach?
Well, what remains is, in Jefferson's own description, a system of the most sublime morality which has ever fallen from the lips of man. That was his goal.
So the final text is more like a collection of ethical teachings than a biography.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Ethics completely replaces metaphysics as the core of belief. This Jesus is primarily concerned with morality, with justice, with how humans ought to treat one another, not with articles of faith or complex rituals.
Which makes his Jesus a kind of Enlightenment figure himself, a political and social reformer whose authority comes from his character.
Exactly, an Enlightenment figure par excellence. And you see that in the teachings he keeps, a heavy focus on basic human equality, forgiveness, humility.
So things like the Sermon on the Mount, parables like the Good Samaritan.
Definitely. The Sermon on the Mount, including the Beatitudes, is central. Key parables like the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, the story of the woman caught in adultery, they're all there. Jefferson's Jesus is this inspiring teacher whose message speaks directly to the common person, making virtue accessible, central to, well, maybe not salvation in the traditional sense, but to a good life.
Now, one of the really striking editorial choices you mentioned involves anti-materialism. He kept long sections on the evils of covetousness.
Yeah, drawing heavily from Matthew 6 and Luke 12, things like, do not store up treasures on earth. That emphasis is strong.
But even more telling, you said, was his treatment of the temple cleansing incident.
Ah, yes. This is, I think, a phenomenal insight into Jefferson's political concerns, not just moral ones.
How so?
Well, the four Gospels usually describe Jesus driving the money changers out of the temple just once, either early or late in his ministry. But Jefferson's version, he includes it twice.
Twice. He repeats it.
Yes. He includes the version from John's Gospel and the version from Mark's Gospel, which is really unusual for a text that he designed specifically to eliminate redundancy and contradiction.
So why deliberately keep that repetition? What's the significance of hitting that financial conflict note twice?
I think it goes way beyond just a simple moral lesson against greed. This repetition acts as a powerful critique of what Jefferson saw as the dangerous oligarchic tendencies exemplified by the alliance of church and state.
Yeah, the merging of wealth and religious power.
Exactly, where wealth and privilege corrupt true moral teaching, replacing it with empty rituals and, well, commerce. His Jesus is forcefully rejecting the commercialization of religion. And that resonates deeply with Jefferson's Republican fears about powerful, wealthy institutions corrupting the young American democracy.
That battle with the established elite, it also comes through really clearly in the parts he kept about Jesus' conflict with the Pharisees, right?
Absolutely. The Jesus of the Jefferson Bible is constantly sparring with established religious power. The Pharisees and scribes are portrayed again and again as these malevolent fanatics, obsessed with nitpicky legalism and their own sectarian pride.
And he kept specific examples of that.
Oh, yes. Jefferson made sure to include the stories where Jesus chides the Pharisees for prioritizing rigid rules over actual human suffering, like the debates over healing someone or even helping a trapped sheep on the Sabbath.
So the religious establishment in Jerusalem is basically the enemy of ethical, rational morality in this version.
That seems to be the clear message.
Which also explains why he emphasizes Jesus' predictions about the destruction of the temple.
Yes, exactly. Those predictions are highlighted, repeated almost. They serve as a kind of political allegory.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, the temple elite, the symbol of centralized clerical power, they're corrupt, they're hypocritical, and they're doomed. The destruction of the physical temple becomes a symbol for the inevitable downfall of the pernicious effects of centralized religious power per se. It's a clear warning against any kind of religious hierarchy gaining too much power in America.
Okay, but here's where the rationalist project seems to hit a really interesting wall. If he rejects the divinity, the miracles, the resurrection, all the supernatural stuff, why on earth does Jefferson keep what you called a muscular dose of divine judgment, warnings of eternal reward and punishment? He keeps the fire and brimstone.
Ah, yes. That is, without doubt, the single most complicated, maybe even contradictory, feature of the Jefferson Bible. And the answer, I think, has to be political rather than purely theological.
What do you mean? He keeps references to Judgment Day, the wicked being cast into the furnace of the fire, there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. If Jesus is just a great human teacher, isn't keeping divine wrath totally inconsistent with pure reason?
It absolutely seems inconsistent, doesn't it? Especially when you think he cut out gentle miracles like healing the sick, but kept the terrifying threat of eternal torment.
It feels hypocritical, almost.
On a purely theological level, maybe? But perhaps not on a political one. Jefferson was deeply convinced that for a democracy, for self-government to actually work, the citizens needed a strong moral foundation.
Okay.
And he seemed to believe that the majority of people, especially maybe the less educated, they needed some kind of external cosmic reinforcement for justice. That idea that your liberties were a gift from God, not to be violated but with his wrath, he thought that was politically necessary.
So the fear of God's wrath, or the hope of eternal reward, it provided this crucial cosmic support for justice that pure, dry reason alone couldn't guarantee for the whole population.
That seems to be his calculation. But crucially, his definition of the wrongdoers who would face this punishment. It wasn't based on belief. It wasn't about whether you accepted the Trinity or not. It was rooted entirely in behavior, in morality. Are you treating others justly? That was the key.
It's just remarkable, isn't it, that such a politically charged, theologically radical text was kept completely private for so long. Decades after Jefferson died, this book was essentially lost to the public, guarded by his family.
Yeah, it was never intended for public view, certainly not for printing during his lifetime. After his death, it passed to his daughter, Martha Jefferson Randolph. It just stayed within the family, like an artifact, for decades.
And its discovery was almost by chance, in 1886.
Pretty much. Cyrus Adler, who later became a curator at the Smithsonian, he was actually cataloging a Hebrew library, and he stumbled across these two mutilated New Testaments. And there was a note linking them to Jefferson's private project.
Wow, imagine finding that.
Must have been incredible. Adler eventually tracked down the actual bound manuscript itself, and in 1895 he managed to buy the volume for $400, which seems like a steal now, from Jefferson's great-granddaughter, Carolina Ramsey Randolph.
And that's how it ended up in the Smithsonian.
That's how. He brought it into the collection where it still is today.
But the real national drama, the fireworks, that didn't start until it became widely known, right? Especially when it hit Congress.
Exactly. The moment this very private document was dragged into the light of public discourse, specifically the halls of Congress, that's when the controversy truly ignited.
And that was 1902. An Iowa congressman, John Fletcher Lacey, proposed a bill for the U.S. government to publish it.
That's right, 9,000 copies. The rationale seemed simple enough. Congress had already published all of Jefferson's other writings, so why not this one too? The cost was pretty modest, about $3,200.
The idea was probably to celebrate Jefferson's rationalist legacy.
You'd think so, but it immediately blew up into this massive nationwide debate about the separation of church and state, about the very nature of American Christianity. It became a genuinely hot controversy.
Okay, let's dig into that opposition. It came from all sides, didn't it? What was the reaction inside Congress?
Well, congressional critics were fast and loud. A lot of Republicans saw the whole project as fundamentally anti-Christian.
Like who?
Charles H. Grosvenor, a Republican from Ohio, he publicly mocked the whole idea. He said with real sarcasm, "I wish it had never been found." biting. He argued the book was an abomination, and the federal government had absolutely no business promoting a text that denied the divinity of Jesus Christ.
And meanwhile, the religious establishment outside Congress, they must have been furious.
Oh, absolutely livid. Ministers across different denominations were pretty much united in condemning it. They called it an emasculated Bible, a mutilated gospel, an unchristian work.
Strong words.
Very. The National Presbyterian Preachers Association actually debated a motion on whether Congress publishing it amounted to a direct, public, and powerful attack on the Christian religion. The feeling was overwhelming. Jefferson's version gutted the core of Christian faith by removing the divinity.
Right.
It left only this empty shell of morality.
Yep.
And they felt the state was essentially endorsing heresy.
But what's so fascinating is the irony here. You also had critics worrying about the state interfering with secularity, even though Jefferson was the ultimate champion of religious freedom.
Isn't that incredible? Yes, you had secularity advocates arguing that any government involvement, even promoting a rationalist deistic text like this, was still an unconstitutional entanglement,
Yeah.
a violation of the Establishment Clause.
And the Jewish community weighed in on that side, too.
Very powerfully. Journals like the Jewish Exponent and the Jewish Comment published strong statements of protest. They basically said government involvement in religious publishing, no matter the content, was simply not the affair of government in this country. Hands off.
So you've got conservative Christians, secularity advocates. Who else was against it?
Well, if you needed one more layer, you had the private publishing industry.
Ah, commercial interests.
Exactly. They saw a potentially popular, marketable book about to be printed for free by the government printing office. They wanted that business for themselves, for general public sale. So you end up with this bizarre coalition. Conservative Christians, strict secularists, and capitalists, all united against publishing Jefferson's little book.
That's quite the alliance. The uproar must have been intense.
It was so strong that Congressman Lacey was initially forced to backtrack, introduce a new bill to block the government printing, and try to find private funding instead.
But the original bill eventually passed anyway.
Despite all the drama, yes. The government went ahead and published the Jefferson Bible in 1904, which really cemented its place in American history.
And that publication led to that really strange legacy.
The really bizarre part, yeah. From 1904 right up until the 1950s, the U.S. government itself kept publishing the Jefferson Bible. And get this, it was officially given as a gift to all newly sworn-in members of the Senate, and I believe Congress too.
Seriously, for half a century, this rationalist, Unitarian-ish text was the official welcome gift for American lawmakers.
That's the story. Quite an unexpected legacy for a book Jefferson kept entirely to himself. Hashtag not outro.
So this deep dive into the Jefferson Bible, it really reveals this singular focus that drove one of America's greatest thinkers, doesn't it? This absolute necessity he felt to extract the ethical system he saw as the most perfect and sublime that has ever been taught by man.
For Jefferson, guaranteeing freedom of individual conscience was paramount, but somehow that freedom needed to be compatible with some kind of authoritative, rational, moral text.
But what stands out most sharply, I think, from our analysis is that final unresolved tension, that point where maybe reason wasn't enough and political necessity kind of took over.
Yeah. Jefferson, this champion of democracy and pure reason, he still felt compelled to keep the concept of divine judgment, the fire and brimstone, that cosmic support for justice. It's a belief structure that seems inherently beyond the rational skepticism he applied everywhere else.
He kept the wrath of God in his back pocket, so to speak.
Because he seemed to believe it was the necessary moral bedrock for behavior in a free democracy, at least for most people.
Which raises, I think, a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. If Jefferson, living back then in an age steeped in religious belief, felt he needed the fear of divine wrath to secure a moral foundation, well, how do societies today, societies that are increasingly secular or much more religiously diverse, how do we attempt to secure that foundational moral behavior, that civic virtue, without relying on the threat of eternal punishment?
It's really the ultimate challenge of self-governance, isn't it? A dilemma that Jefferson himself wrestled with, quite literally, right up until the end of his life.
If this deep dive sparked your curiosity, maybe gave you an aha moment about this complex tangle of religion, philosophy, and political power in the early American Republic, please do remember to subscribe, like, and maybe drop a comment to share your own insights. We'd love to hear them.
Yes, thank you for joining us for this in-depth analysis today.
Thank you for listening to VSOW.